In 300 AD, a block of curdled milk was a Roman soldier's survival ration. By 1980, governments stored billions of pounds in underground caves. That shift from military fuel to global staple changed history forever. But cheese's story doesn't start in Rome. It starts with a mistake 10,000 years ago. Before the very first block of cheese was ever made, humans hit a massive biological wall. About 10,000 years ago, the world changed. In a region we now call the Middle East, humans did something completely new. They stopped hunting wild animals and started taming them. They built fences. They gathered wild goats, wild sheep, and wild cows. Very quickly, these early farmers noticed something. These animals produced a liquid, milk. It was white, thick, and full of rich nutrients. On paper, it looked like the ultimate survival food. It had vitamins, it had protein, it had fat. But when these ancient humans tried to drink it, they ran into a painful reality. Adult humans could not digest it. Every single adult alive at the time was lactose intolerant. Today, we think drinking milk is normal. We buy jugs of it at the store without a second thought. But back then, adult dairy tolerance did not exist. Human bodies were only designed to process milk during infancy. Once a child grew up, the body stopped making the chemical needed to break down dairy sugars. Biting into dairy or drinking raw milk caused severe cramps, violent sickness, and terrible pain. For these early people, milk was a trap. It was full of life-saving energy, but it was essentially poison to their systems. And yet, these early communities were desperate. Winters in Europe and the Middle East were brutal. The ground froze, crops failed, wild animals vanished. Starvation was a shadow that followed every family. Parents looked at their herds of cows and goats, knowing that hundreds of gallons of rich liquid were right there, completely useless. They were surrounded by food they could not eat. They needed a way to break the biological lock. They needed a miracle. Instead, they got a mistake. The person who invented cheese is lost to history. We will never know their name, but we know exactly how they did it. It happened because of a standard way people packed for long trips. In a world without plastic bags, glass jars, or metal thermoses, people used every single part of the animals they killed. To carry water and milk across dry lands, they took the internal organs of animals and turned them into flasks. Specifically, they used the stomachs of young calves and lambs. The story goes that a nomadic traveler was getting ready for a long ride across a hot, dry landscape. He filled his animal stomach flask with fresh milk, tied it to the side of his animal, and started his journey under a burning sun. For hours, the traveler rode. The milk inside the pouch sloshed back and forth with every step. The temperature inside the flask rose as the sun beat down. But deep inside the liquid, a silent chemical reaction was taking place. The stomach lining of young animals contains a natural chemical called rennet. This chemical has one specific job. It curdles milk inside a young animal's body so it digests slowly. As the traveler moved, the heat woke up the old rennet left in the flask walls. The constant sloshing mixed everything together. The warm, acidic environment caused the milk to split apart. When the traveler finally stopped at sunset to drink, he did not get milk. He tipped the container back, and out came a thin, watery liquid. The traveler was angry. He thought his milk was ruined. He took his knife, cut open the leather pouch, and looked inside. In the middle of the watery puddle sat a thick, white, spongy clump. He was hungry. He was miles from home. He had no other options. So, he took a risk. He reached into the wet pouch, scooped up the white mush, and put it in his mouth. It tasted mild. It tasted creamy. It was surprisingly good. More importantly, he did not get sick. He survived. The traveler had no idea what science was. He did not know what an enzyme was. He did not understand that the watery part, the whey, had carried away almost all the dangerous lactose sugars. He did not realize that the solid clump left behind was pure protein and fat. He just knew it was food. News spread fast along the ancient trade paths. People realized that if you let milk sit inside animal organs, it transformed. It turned into something tough, something safe, something that did not rot. They had broken through the wall. By 3000 BC, cheese was no longer a rare accident. It had become a massive industry that helped build the world's first great civilizations. In ancient Egypt, cheese was treated like gold. The Egyptian climate was incredibly hot. Fresh milk would spoil in a couple of hours, turning into a dangerous sludge. But Egyptian cheesemakers found a fix. If they added massive amounts of salt to the white curds and pressed out every single drop of water, the cheese could beat the heat. When archaeologists dug up the tomb of Ptahmes, a high-ranking Egyptian official, they found something amazing hidden among the gold and statues. Sitting in a broken clay pot was a white, solid mass wrapped in ancient cloth. It was cheese. It was over 3,200 years old. Scientists tested it and found it was a hard cheese made from sheep and goat milk, packed with salt to keep it fresh. The rulers of Egypt refused to go into the afterlife without their cheese supply. It was a sign of safety, wealth, and power over nature. Meanwhile, across the sea in ancient Greece, cheese became part of their myths. The Greeks did not just see cheese as groceries, they saw it as a gift from the gods. In the famous story of the Odyssey, the hero Odysseus walks into the cave of the giant monster, the Cyclops. The story spends a long time describing the inside of the giant's cave. It is not full of bones or stolen treasure. It is a highly organized cheese factory. Odysseus sees rows of shelves loaded with drying cheeses. He watches the giant milk his sheep, curdle the liquid, and press the moisture out. To the ancient Greeks, even a wild monster understood the science of cheese. Greek doctors started using cheese as medicine. They gave it to people who were weak, people with stomach issues, and people with infections. But they had a big problem. Greece was broken up into tiny, isolated valleys and independent cities. Every single village made cheese a different way. There was no standard. It was hard to move large amounts across the world without it changing or spoiling. The cheese trade was waiting for an empire to pick it up. The civilization that turned cheese into a weapon was ancient Rome. The Romans did not care about myths or legends. They cared about military logistics. As Rome grew into a massive empire, its biggest problem was not defeating enemy armies. It was feeding its own men. A single Roman army unit had about 5,000 heavily armed soldiers. At its peak, Rome had dozens of these units spread across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. That meant feeding hundreds of thousands of men every single day, miles away from home. If a Roman army ran out of food, the soldiers stopped fighting, the borders fell, and the empire died. Shipping fresh meat to the rainy hills of Britain or the deserts of Iraq was impossible. Grain was the main food, but grain takes time to grind and bake into bread. The army needed something instant. They needed a high-energy, portable food that could sit in a soldier's backpack for months without rotting. They found their answer in a hard cheese called Caseus formatus. The Roman government turned cheesemaking into a giant factory system. The military wrote strict rules for what a soldier had to eat. Every single soldier was legally promised a set amount of cheese every day. It was a hard, salty block. It looked small. It was not. When you multiply that small block by hundreds of thousands of soldiers over a long war, the numbers become insane. The Roman Empire needed millions of pounds of hard cheese every year just to keep its armies moving. To get this much food, Roman engineers built giant state-run farms. They wrote the first real textbooks on how to mass-produce dairy. Roman writers recorded exact, step-by-step guides. They wrote down exactly how much chemical to add, how heavy the stones needed to be to squeeze the water out, and how long to let the cheese sit in salt. The Romans learned that by leaving the cheese in dark, cool cellars for months, it lost its water but kept all its power. It became hard as wood and lasted forever. Roman soldiers marched across the world, holding swords in their hands and hard cheese in their bags. They built roads, defeated tribes, and cleared wild forests, all powered by preserved milk. When Julius Caesar led his troops into battle, his men were eating cheese. When the armies pushed into the freezing forests of Germany, cheese kept them alive. The Roman Empire did not just win with iron, it won with cheese. Everywhere the Roman army built a permanent base, they set up dairy farms. They taught the local tribes in France, England, and Spain the exact Roman ways to press and dry cheese. They built the foundation of how Europe eats. Then, the empire broke. When Rome fell, the great roads, the open trade routes, and the government manuals disappeared overnight. Europe entered a wild, dangerous time. Cities burned, wars broke out everywhere, and armies marched across fields, destroying crops and killing farm animals. Mass food production stopped. The great Roman farms fell apart. It looked like the secret of making cheese would be lost forever, but it found a safe place to hide: Christian monasteries. During the medieval years, monasteries were not just quiet places for prayer. They were the top science labs and agricultural centers of Europe. Monks lived inside safe stone walls away from the chaos of the world. They were the only people who could read and write, which let them save old Roman farm books. More importantly, wealthy lords gave the monks huge pieces of land. To keep these lands running, the monks raised massive herds of cows and sheep. Soon, they had too much milk. The monks could not drink it all before it spoiled, and they could not sell it to faraway towns because the roads were full of thieves. So, the monks became obsessed with saving it. They turned cheesemaking into a holy science. They kept daily journals, tracking the weather, the dampness of their cellars, and the age of their wheels. They experimented with different types of mold, different bacteria, and different washes. Inside the damp stone basements of old abbeys, the world's most famous cheeses were created. In the mountains of France, monks made strong, smelly cheeses. In England, they created early versions of crumbly cheeses. In the high valleys of Switzerland, monks bred tough cows that could live on freezing mountain grass, producing massive, heavy wheels of Swiss cheese that could last for years. The scale of these monk cheese operations became huge. Monasteries became the richest businesses in Europe. They started selling their extra cheese at big town markets, making mountains of money that helped pay for giant stone cathedrals. A famous story shows how powerful this food could be. In the late 700s, the great Emperor Charlemagne was traveling across his land. He stopped without warning at a small monastery. It was a Friday, a day when religious rules said no one could eat meat. The monks were terrified. The ruler of the Western world was sitting in their dining hall, and they had nothing to give him except a wheel of local cheese covered in a strange blue-green mold. Charlemagne looked at the plate with anger. He took his knife and started cutting away the blue mold, thinking it was rotten poison. The head monk rushed forward, bowing down. He told the emperor that the blue parts were actually the best part of the whole food. Charlemagne was surprised. He took a bite of the moldy section. He was shocked. The cheese was rich, creamy, and packed with a deep flavor he had never tasted in his life. He loved it so much that he ordered the monks to send 2 full wagon loads of this blue cheese to his palace every single year. The monks did not just keep people fed. They created the map of modern food. When you walk down the grocery aisle today and see cheddar, Gouda, Parmesan, or Roquefort, you are not looking at new corporate items. You are looking at the secret recipes of medieval monks. For nearly 9,000 years, cheese stayed an artistic, handmade product, tied to tiny farms and the work of monks. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. In the 1800s, humans started moving off farms and into crowded, smoky cities. Factory workers doing 14-hour days needed cheap, mass-produced food that would not spoil. The old way of making cheese, one wheel at a time, by hand, could not keep up with the massive hunger of the cities. In 1851, a man named Jesse Williams fixed that. In New York, he built the world's very first commercial cheese factory. Instead of making cheese from just his own cows, Williams collected fresh milk from dozens of nearby farms every morning. He brought it to a central building, used steam machines to heat the liquid evenly, and put workers onto an organized assembly line. It worked perfectly. In his first year, Williams made over 100,000 pounds of identical, cheap cheese. The old art had become a modern factory science. Then came the corporate takeover. In 1903, a young man named James L. Kraft arrived in Chicago with nothing but a horse, a cart, and $65. He noticed that real cheese had a major problem for grocery stores. It kept aging, it got oily on shelves, and it spoiled fast if it got warm. Kraft tried a radical experiment. He took cheap cheddar cheese, mixed it with melting salts, cooked it until it liquefied, and poured it into clean metal cans. He had invented processed cheese. Old-school cheesemakers hated it. They said it was fake food, but the public loved it. Processed cheese did not get oily, it did not age, and it could sit on a warm shelf for years without rotting. When America entered the First World War in 1917, the army realized that Kraft's canned cheese was the ultimate food for the trenches. The government bought over 6 million pounds of it to send to Europe. Millions of young soldiers got used to the taste. When they came home, they wanted it in their local shops. The era of the plastic-wrapped cheese slice had arrived. This massive production eventually created a bizarre crisis in the late 1900s. By the late 1970s, the US government was buying billions of pounds of extra milk from farmers to keep dairy prices from crashing. They turned that milk into giant blocks of processed cheese. Soon, they had too much food. They ran out of normal buildings to store it. So, they turned to nature. They rented deep, dark limestone caves under the city of Springfield, Missouri. Hundreds of feet underground, in massive stone tunnels, the government stacked millions of pounds of cheese in long rows. At its peak in the 1980s, this secret vault held over 1.2 billion pounds of dairy. Think about that number. That is the weight of 3 Empire State Buildings, made completely of cheese, sitting in the dark under the earth. The government tried to give it away to schools and poor families, creating a legendary item known as government cheese, but the supply was still too big. To fix it, the dairy industry started massive marketing campaigns to put cheese on every single fast food item in the country. They paid for pizzas with cheese stuffed inside the crust, tacos packed with 3 layers of dairy, and burgers covered in melted slices. The plan worked. Between 1970 and today, the amount of cheese the average person eats went from 11 pounds a year to nearly 40 pounds a year. Cheese was no longer a survival food for a Roman soldier. It had become a corporate tool to design modern fast food. The story of cheese covers 10,000 years, multiple continents, and the rise and fall of human nations. It started as a desperate biological hack, a simple mistake inside a leather flask that allowed early humans to survive freezing winters. It became the army fuel that built the Roman Empire. It survived the collapse of the Dark Ages inside the quiet rooms of smart monks. It was turned into an industrial product by American factories, and it was hidden by the millions of pounds inside giant underground caves. A 10,000-year-old biological miracle became a cheap global convenience. And it is sitting in your house right now. In your refrigerator door, wrapped in plastic, melted on your food, waiting to be noticed. A quiet, ancient sign of human survival, sitting right next to the milk. If this story surprised you, subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories behind everyday things. We have got a lot more coming.